Now, I personally have derived many benefits from Toastmasters, and there's many things that we can learn in Toastmasters. And of course, I've improved my speaking and my leadership skills. But the thing that has really helped me most in the years that I've been a Toastmaster and afterwards is learning parliamentary procedure. And who would have thought that that would be the case? When I joined Toastmasters, I was a member of the Statistics Canada Club, and they had 2 hour meetings. So they had lots of time. So every meeting, they had a 10 or 15-minute parliamentary procedure session. And we would sometimes have real business to do. But if we didn't have real business, we would vote on moving that pillar out of the center of the room. You know, even if the building was going to fall down, we would still discuss that and argue yes, for and against it, and vote. And that's so we learned how to argue, how to debate, and how to use parliamentary procedure. And it's quite interesting that once you get used to it, you can make passionate arguments without attacking the other person, because you learn to attack the argument as opposed to attacking a person. So that comes in really handy in life too. So afterwards, a few years later, I started joining community associations, and it wasn't long before when they realized that I knew Robert's Rules of Order and that kind of thing, that they would ask me to be on the executive committee and then promote me to being the president, etc. And I've actually been the president of several national associations, as well as local Ottawa associations, such as the Humanist Association of Canada and Ottawa. And I was on the executive of my local Liberal Writing Association for a while too. And all of this because I had learned parliamentary procedure, because otherwise I wouldn't have um, been a member of the executive, because I wouldn't have known what to do. So that really opened a lot of doors for me. And in one of the associations, I even became a humanist officiant. So I can marry people and do funerals and all that stuff, baby namings. And that's something else that I would never have gotten into, something that I greatly enjoyed that I wouldn't have done if I hadn't learned parliamentary procedure. And of course, public speaking as well. So all that to say that parliamentary procedure might be one of the most important things you learn in Toastmasters too. So you'll know that well, you won't know it in the next 45 minutes, but I hope you do learn the basics this evening so that you can move forward, and maybe you can start using it outside of Toastmasters as I have. So parliamentary procedure and rules of order. Now, the objective of this presentation is for you, the attendees, to understand what parliamentary procedure is, why it's important, and how to use the basics, and to know where to find everything else you need to know beyond the basics. The next question is, why do we use parliamentary procedure? Well, it's very important in a business meeting because it gives everyone the opportunity to speak, and everyone can vote, so that they're part of the decision. And it's a democratic process, and there's a chairperson to moderate the meeting. I'm sure you've been at meetings where some loud person shouts over everybody else, and when someone starts to speak, they'll interrupt them and disagree with them and that kind of thing. And when that happens, it sort of shuts down the rest of the audience sometimes, and people don't get to contribute their ideas. So by having a chairperson who knows how to use parliamentary procedure, you have a well-run meeting. It's democratic. Everyone speaks, and everyone participates in the decision that is made, because the objective is to make a decision, or one or more decisions, on every time there is a motion put forward. So when do we use parliamentary procedure? Well, it's when you need to make a business decision. It could be for any executive committee. It could be your condo committee. It could be in Toastmasters at the district council. It could be a business corporation or a not-for-profit corporation executive. Anywhere a group of people forms a business association, they need to make decisions. And parliamentary procedure is a tool, as I said earlier, to have it done fairly and democratically and allowing everyone to participate. Now, there are several rules of order that we call parliamentary procedure. The Roberts Rules of Orders is the most common that we know as Toastmasters, because it is the Toastmasters Rules of Order that we use. It's very common in the United States and in Canada as well. And it's the one that I know best. There's another one called Bournais Rules of Order, and these are the ones that our House of Parliament uses. The House of Commons uses Bournais Rules of Order. And there's a Code Morin, and this is the rules of order that Quebec generally uses. So the Toastmaster clubs in Quebec would probably use Code Morin if they wanted to. So as you can see, there's not just one, but there are several. They're all very similar though. So if you learn the basics in one, you pretty well have the basics of all the other ones too. So you needn't be too concerned about there being a huge difference. And now we're just going to look at the types of motions that we had in Robert's Rules of Orders. Everything starts with a motion. That's kind of got a double meaning there, doesn't it? Because motion starts everything. Everything in business starts with a motion. So somebody has to propose a motion or move a motion that something will be done. And that's called a main motion. Then you have subsidiary motions, which can enhance the main motion. It can add to it, or it can change it a little bit, or it can decide what to do with that motion. And then we have incidental motions, which are more involved with procedure, how to go about proceeding and debating the motion and that kind of thing. And then there's privileged motions, such as that would be something like to adjourn the meeting, can we close the window, that kind of thing. And these are, I'm going to show you a lot of these later on in the presentation. You don't need to memorize them all. I don't think anyone really memorizes them all, because it's easy to get a sheet with all the motions on it and all the information you need to know to use them. So it's, somebody once said, I think it was it Einstein or somebody said that he never bothered remembering anything he could access from a book. So if you know where the book is, that's all you need to know. So, all right, so we'll get to all these motions in a few minutes. But first, we're going to talk about the main motion, because this is where everything starts, as I said. So how does that work? Well, when you're in a business meeting, the chairperson will ask, is there any business? And then if there is business, if one of the members has business, they will stand and they will say, Mr. Chair, I move that. And that can be whatever that person wants to make a decision on. We will play around with that later on. And then before it gets on the floor, it has to be seconded by another member of the assembly. Because if not at least two people want this motion to be debated or discussed, then it just dies on the floor. So in other words, if there's only one person who wants to discuss, that's not enough. There has to be at least two. That's why we need a seconder. And then the presiding officer, the chairperson, places the motion before the group. Now, how that is done is he repeats the motion. We have a motion to do, etc. And then he invites the audience members to speak for or against the motion. Because really you shouldn't, and this is another thing that comes in very handy to save time, because in an informal meeting, somebody might stand and just start talking or complaining or whatever, and the person might not be really speaking for or against the motion. They might just be venting or whatever. So in an organized business meeting, if somebody wants to speak, they have to stand and say, Mr. Chair, I speak for the motion or I speak against the motion. Then we know why they're standing and at least then we know whether they support the motion or not. And then they speak for or against the motion. And another important point is that everyone addresses the chair. So you'll notice, like in the House of Parliament, when one of the members stand, they say, Mr. Speaker, and they address the speaker. They might talk about one of the other members, but they're talking about one of the other members to the speaker. So it's the same in any business meeting. So you stand, you address the chair, and nobody speaks unless they're recognized by the chair. So first somebody would stand and say, Mr. Chair, I have a motion. And then the chair would just say, okay, go ahead, Tom. And then Tom would present his motion. And then the motion is open for debate. So people stand in turn, and when they're recognized by the chair, and they speak either for or against the motion that's on the floor. Generally, the person that moves the motion is allowed to speak for the motion first, and then other people can speak either for or against it. So this could go on, this could go on for 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, however long it takes. And then once everyone has had the chance to speak and the chair feels that there's no more discussion, then the chair asks the members to vote. So you can do a vote in a number of ways. It can be a voice vote. So you can say yay for yes or nay for no. You can do a hand vote. In other words, everyone for, raise your hand. Everyone against, raise your hand. Abstentions, raise your hand. And if it's obvious, like if there were a whole lot more yeses than nos, then we don't need to count the vote. If it looks very close, then you have to count the vote. So you have to actually have a ballot and collect the ballots and then count the ballots. Another reason you would do it that way is if it was a secret vote. Oftentimes during an election, people don't want others to know how they voted. So it will be a ballot vote and they'll be counted and nobody will know who voted for who. So these are, let's see, is there one more here? Yes, there is one more. And then the final thing is the presiding officer will announce the result of the vote. Once he's determined whether it's been passed or failed, he will say the motion passes or the motion fails. If the motion passes, then it's a rule or it's accepted and it's in the law or the policy of the association. And if it's failed, then it's just gone away. So these are the steps to handle a motion. And now I'm going to ask you, the audience, to participate. I'm going to ask somebody to propose a motion on, you can make something up. It'll just be something funny anyway. Something, propose that something be done. So would anyone like to propose a motion?
I move that we accept the minutes as read.
Okay, and who was that?
Sorry, this is Gina Powell-Pridgeon.
Okay, Gina Powell. Okay, so Gina proposes that we accept the minutes as read. Do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Anna Bevelaka seconds the motion. There would be a secretary in the assembly making note of what the motion is, who moved the motion, and who seconded it. So now, okay, so we have a motion before the assembly. Fellow Toastmasters, we have a motion to accept the minutes as read. And I'm going to, like normally you would just say if there's no objection, we'll pass it, then there's no discussion. But I'm going to make this one for discussion. So now who was the mover again? I can't see you on the screen, so
Gina Powell-Pridgeon, I'm sorry.
Hey, so okay, so Gina, would you like to speak to the motion?
We should accept the minutes as read because the minutes are correct.
They're correct. Okay, you've reviewed them, great.
Yes, correct. Now I've reviewed the minutes. Thank you, sorry.
Well, thank you, Gina. Now, would anyone else like to speak for or against the motion? Like we can ham it up here, it's not serious. So yes, that's it.
Well, I'm speaking against the motion to accept the minutes because there were certain details that were not incorporated during the business session, particularly in new business.
Okay. All right. Would anyone else like to speak for or against the motion? Okay. Well,
this is Winnie Dixon. I would like to speak against the motion because there's some misspellings in the minutes that need to be corrected before we accept it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak for or against the motion?
This is Anjanette Powell, and I would like to speak for the motion to accept the minutes as read. The body has had opportunity for 2 weeks to review the minutes. So I believe that there were no corrections sent to the secretary.
All right, thank you, Anjanette. And would anyone else like to speak for or against the motion? Okay, well, seeing no one, I think discussion has ended, so I will now call for a vote. The motion is to accept the minutes as read. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Yes, I see 1, 2. All those opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2. I think I actually saw 3, 4. So 3, it's 3-2 then. That's how the vote goes. And like I'll assume the rest of you have abstained. So we have a 3-2 vote. The minutes will be accepted as read. There we go. You just did a motion. Congratulations. That's great. So this is what you just did. There were 6 steps. It's move, second, place it before the assembly, debate, vote, and say the results. So if you're the chairperson, this is the sequence that you would follow. It's not that complicated. It's somebody moves a motion, seconder, you repeat the motion to the assembly, invite discussion, announce that you're going to have a vote. So then you repeat the question again and ask for the vote. And that's how you be a chairperson. All right, so now as we're going to get into these subsidiary motions. And again, these are, don't bother trying to remember these because there's too many, and there's, what I'd like you to just understand is the kind of things we can do with a subsidiary motion. And as I said, you can get a cheat sheet or a book, and you can, if you are chairing a meeting, you can have something handy to reference so that you'll know what you should do. So a subsidiary motion is related to handling the motion. The most common one is the second one, which is to amend the motion. For instance, if somebody was to make a motion to buy a new Apple computer for the association, then that would be a motion. But then somebody could amend that and say, we should buy an Apple computer with a 5 gig memory. I'm not sure if they have 5 gig memories, but let's pretend they do, and then that would be that. And if that was accepted, then that would be added to the motion. And then the motion would be to buy an Apple computer with a 5 gig memory. So that's how you use amendments. Another handy one is to refer to committee. In other words, if after the discussion carries on for a bit, the assembly realizes that, we really need more information, or we need some people to think about this and do some research. So, I move that we refer the question to committee chaired by so-and-so, and if the assembly agrees, then it'll go to committee, and that committee will come back with a report at the next meeting, and then the question can be decided. So these are the kind of things. There's laid on the table. Laid on the table and postpone indefinitely are quite similar. Postpone indefinitely just basically gets rid of the motion. In other words, you postpone it indefinitely, so it'll like never come back. Laid on the table can be the same if you don't lay it on the table with a time limitation. So if we say lay it on the table until next meeting or until next month, then it'll come back to the assembly. But if you just lay it on the table, it sort of dies. It just stays on the table. So that's how we get rid of motions that become, after a lot of discussion, that everyone thinks, well, it's kind of pointless or useless, or it's not really important, or not worth discussing, or whatever the reason is, and they can just get rid of it. If the assembly wants to. So anyway, that's enough for subsidiary motions for now. So subsidiary motions sort of enhance the main motion, or they deal with the main motion. And the next kind that we have are called incidental motions. And these are more to do with procedure. For instance, a point of order. If I was the chair of a meeting and I got down to the start of the meeting and I went right to accepting the minutes, somebody could say, point of order, Mr. Chair, you forgot to approve the agenda because I had missed something that's supposed to be done. Incidental motions can interrupt the speaker. In other words, you can just stand up and say point of order, or you can say point of information, or you can say I move to divide the question. In other words, these subsidiary motions normally don't interrupt the speaker, so you wait till the speaker's finished. But then, but incidental motions can interrupt the speaker. A point of information, and this is misunderstood because sometimes I've seen people stand up and say, I have a point of information, and then they give information, they say something to the assembly. But that's not what it's for. It's to ask a question. In other words, if it was to buy a new computer for the assembly, you might say, point of information, Mr. Chair, how much does a new computer cost? And then the chair would ask somebody who knows, you know, what is the cost? And they tell the assembly, and then that would be satisfied. I'll just cover one more of these, and that's dividing the question, division of the question. Somebody might make a motion that we should buy a new computer and a new banner. But really you have two things that you want to buy. So it might be better to discuss them individually. So Tom could stand up and say, Mr. Chair, I move that we divide the question. So then it would become two motions, one to buy a new computer and one to buy a new banner. And each one would be discussed in turn. So that's our incidental motions. Then we have the privileged motions. It could be like calling for the orders of the day. Does anyone know what that is? You just raise your hand. I probably can't see it anyway, but anyway. So calling the orders of the day is proposed to bring the assembly back on time. For instance, if we're 15 minutes behind the schedule and we're gonna be late and we don't wanna be late, calling the orders means we skip everything between now and where we're supposed to be. And we go right to where we're supposed to be by the time. So, and actually if it's at the end of the meeting and if the meeting's overtime, if you call the orders of the day and if it's accepted, then the meeting ends. So you stop going into overtime. That's a handy thing to know how to do. There's a question of privilege, like, you know, can we open the window? It's too hot in here, kind of thing. It's, you know, a small point, but it still needs to be approved by the assembly because everyone's in the room. And there could be a motion to recess or even a motion to adjourn. And I'm going to, okay, so we'll go to the next one. This is the cheat sheet that I mentioned earlier. This is the kind of thing you can have handy to know if you're the chairperson. So for instance, if you want to close the meeting, the very first one, I don't know if you can see it really well, but if you want to close the meeting, you say, I move to adjourn. And then the next 5 columns tells you, can you interrupt the speaker? Does it need a second? Is it debatable? Is it amendable? And what kind of a vote does it require? So take, for instance, if you want to limit debate. So in other words, if there's a motion and somebody stands up and says, I move to limit debate to 10 minutes. So that this question doesn't take more than 10 minutes, and after 10 minutes, it would have to come to a vote. So this is, you can't interrupt the speaker when you're proposing this motion. It does require a seconder. It's not debatable. So in other words, you don't say, does anyone want to speak for or against? You skip that part. And it is amendable. So you can amend it. And you could maybe change it from 10 minutes to 15 minutes or something. And what's interesting is that when you vote on this kind of a motion, it requires a 2/3 vote. That's a supermajority. So it's like 66% or 67%. So most motions require just a plain majority, but some require a supermajority, especially ones that have to do with bylaws and that kind of thing. So I won't go through this anymore. There's all the subsidiary motions and all the incidental motions, privileged motions can all be seen on a sheet like this. So you can have that handy when you're the chair. And then if somebody says, you know, I want to refer to committee, you can quickly refer if you don't know and say, okay, You can't interrupt the chair, but it needs a second, and yes, we can debate it, and yes, it can be amended, and it just needs a plain majority. So you'll know this quickly just by scanning your cheat sheet. So these are the tools for the chair, and it's really good to review them if you want to be a parliamentarian or if you want to be a chairperson. It's good to review these just to know what is possible to do. Not that you have to remember, how to do it, but at least if somebody uses this motion, then I'll go and see how to handle it. Or if you're not the chair, even if you're just in the assembly, and you want to participate effectively, then, and if you know all of these kinds of motions and what they can do, you can be more productive as a member of the assembly. So that's all the time I'll take you for that. Let's see, how much time do we have here? Oh, yeah, we have time. I'm going to ask you to participate once again. This time, we're going to have someone propose a motion and have someone amend it as well. So I'm gonna stop so I can see everybody, and you can turn your cameras on again and your microphones if they're turned off. And I invite anyone to propose a motion.
I propose that we get food delivery for every district event we attend.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I see Anna's hand there on the screen. So we'll give Anna Bevelak the second. Okay, now would anyone like? Now I present the motion before the assembly is that the districts provides food for every district event. And would anyone like to speak for or against? And I'll ask Tanya if she would like to speak first.
I would like to speak first. Thank you. I think that, we take the time out of our life to go to the events to get our education, but we do it after work and we do it in between fitting everything else in, and having that meal provided for us would just make it the icing on the cake. It would make learning more enjoyable. It would stop the stomach from growling. And why not? Why not have a meal together? If we're online, we might as well be doing something that involves all of our senses at the same time.
Okay, that sounds good. Although I shouldn't be commenting as a chair. All right, would anyone else like to speak for or against the motion?
Debbie Bennett, I speak against the motion. It would be too expensive to feed everyone.
Oh.
Pardon me?
Debbie Bennett, I speak against the motion. It will be too expensive to feed everyone.
It would be too expensive. Okay. Thank you for your opinion on that. Now, I'm going to ask someone to amend the motion. Now, you can amend it regarding the price, the kind of food we would get, events that would be supplied with food. So throw something out there.
I amend the motion that we only spend $10 per person per member.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that amendment?
I will second it.
Who's speaking? You have to identify yourself.
Anthony Bernardello.
Anthony, okay. I saw Francine's hand too, but I'm going to give Anthony a chance. He's hidden here. Okay, so Anthony seconds that we limit the price to $10 per person for the food supplied by the district. Now, would anyone like to speak for or against that amendment?
Dudley here. I'd like to speak against the amendment. I believe we can go to $15 per person because having been coming out of 2 years of pandemic with no local or no rental for a space, I guess we can afford $15 per person for our meetings.
Okay, so you speak against the motion, the amendment. Would anyone else like to speak on the amendment? Okay, so seeing none, we're going.
Well, I think, Simon, I think that that's a wonderful idea, as the fact that the food prices have gone up in the middle of the pandemic. So I didn't calculate that when I made it $10. So I agree with Dudley, $15 would make more sense.
Yeah, but well, okay, so then you're speaking against $10 as well. Now, see, it's important to note here that we're not changing it to 15, but we're just speaking for or against 10.
Okay.
Speaking against 10, okay. All right, so now I'm going to pretend that everyone has spoken on who wants to speak. And now we're going to vote on the amendment. Because when you have an amendment, you have to vote on the amendment, then you go back to the main motion. So we have an amendment that the district will provide food to all its members when they're having a district event to a limit of 10, I'm sorry. The amendment is that providing food to the members at district events will be limited to $10. All those in favor, please raise your hand. If you don't have your video on, I can't see you. Okay, so somebody has to raise their hand to be in favor. All those opposed? Okay, we have 4 opposed. And any abstentions? Okay, so the motion is voted, I think it's 4-1 or 4-0. So against, so the amendment fails. So now we go back to the main motion and it's not amended. If it had been approved, then the amendment would become part of the motion. But since it wasn't approved, the amendment just dies and we're back to the main motion. So at this point, I would like to call a vote on the motion, which is that the district will provide food for the members during district events, and there's no limit on this. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, opposed.
Question before we finalize that. Could we add a new amendment at this point, since the old amendment was shut down? Could we say, I propose a new amendment that we allow food for all members at $15?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Yeah, that could have been done, but I didn't go there because of the time, but yes, so yes, you can have as many amendments as you want. You can even have amendments 2 levels deep. In other words, you can amend an amendment, but you can't substantially change the meaning of the amendment. So that's why we couldn't. The amendment was to make it $10, and making it 15 would like wipe out the 10. We could have said make it $10 only for French fries, or something like that. But anyway, okay. So we're back to the main motion, and it's. Did we vote on the main motion yet?
Oh, I stopped it before we voted. Okay,
so we're gonna try it again. All those in favor of supplying food, raise your hand. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Opposed? Nobody's opposed. Oh, well, I guess you're on the hook, Tanya. It's passed. The motion's passed.
Officially passed. I'm sure we didn't have quorum, but officially passed.
We're all getting free food. Right. So that's how that works. So what's important here is that you have a main motion, and then there's an amendment which needs to be seconded, voted on, and then you're back to the main motion. Then you vote on your main motion. So that's the order of doing that. And back to the presentation. Committees of the whole. One of the last things I'm going to discuss are committees of the whole. We move to committees of the whole when there's, like people just want to really talk instead of deciding things right now. They want to brainstorm, mull things over. So you move to a committee of everybody who's in the assembly. Then you can talk and banter and discuss it and maybe formulate a motion, and then move back into the formal session where you actually vote on this motion or discuss it formally. So this is to have an opportunity to kind of, excuse me, to kind of let your hair down and discuss things informally. So that can be done too. Now the last point I have here are the club elections, which is, it's not really parliamentary procedure, but it's important business that we do in Toastmasters especially. So when you have a club election, there's a nomination chair that tries to find nominees leading up to the election. And then the nomination chair generally chairs the election. So you start with the highest ranked position, which in our case would be president. and you announce any nominations you have, and you ask if there are any other nominations for the position of president. You have to repeat it 3 times. So that makes sure that anyone who thinks they might want to put their name forward can do so. And you can either nominate yourself or you can nominate somebody else. When someone's nominated, the chair needs to ask them, do they accept? Because if they don't accept, then it's not an issue. If they accept, then they are nominated for that position. If there is
Simon, if somebody nominates, do they have to have a seconder?
No.
Okay.
No, nominations don't require a seconder. And then if there is more than one candidate for that position, both candidates have the opportunity to speak for 2 minutes. They don't have to, but you know, it's in their interest to do so, especially if the other one does or if the others do. So they speak for 2 minutes on their behalf. And then the chairperson calls for a vote. Now the vote is just a simple majority, so it has to be greater than 50%. I'll just add here, I won't go into necessarily explaining all the whys and wherefores, but it's not 50% plus 1. It's greater than 50%. And there is a difference. So if you want to play with the numbers, you'll see that there is a difference. Okay, so once, and this is important because if there are 3 or 4 people, and maybe they all get 25%, right? So then the last one drops off. The one with the lowest vote drops off, and you have another vote. If no one gets 50%, then the third person drops off, and you only have 2 left. So when there's only 2 left, then you're going to get 50% for sure, unless they're exactly even. And I've seen that happen, believe it or not. So, all right. So, and if that happens, then you vote again and again until somebody gets more than 50%. So that works. Then the nomination chair announces the results, and the same thing is repeated for every other position. So that would be Vice President of Education, Vice President of Membership, and so on the list. One reason to do it like this is, let's say if somebody runs for president and they don't get elected, well, they might want to run for Vice President of Education. But if you do that one first, and the president is the last one, then if they don't get president, you know, they can't try for anything else. So that's one reason that we start at the top. Okay, so I'm going to summarize. I'm not sure how time's going here. Not too bad. So rules of order are essential for business meetings. It keeps things in order, it lets everyone speak, and it greatly assists coming to a decision. The order is somebody moves a motion, it gets seconded, the chair places it before the assembly, there's some debate, a vote, and the result is announced. So that's the order. It's not really that complicated. After you do it a couple times, it becomes like riding a bicycle. And then we have elections, of course, which are an important part of our club business, and I just reviewed that. The basics of parliamentary procedure are easy to learn. If you learn how to present a motion, how to amend a motion, you know, if you want to do something else, there's a parliamentarian there who will guide the assembly, and you know help the members accomplish what they want. As a matter of fact, the member could stand to a point of information and say, well, how do I get rid of this motion or whatever, you know, whatever they want to do, and then the parliamentarians can suggest something that they might do. So that's a summary for the parliamentary procedure. I encourage you to learn the basics and to use it at every opportunity you have, and join your community associations, whether it's your church group or your condo executive, whatever, you know, join the boards of directors and have your voice heard and do it with parliamentary procedure. Robert's Rules of Order. Do we have any questions? Francine.
I just have, the only comment I want to say is well done, Simon. Quite clear, nothing confusing, and just it was a good, excellent presentation.
Thank you, Francine. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yes, Anna.
I just want to ask for a point of clarification. I was running an election, not in Toastmasters, and somebody comes in with a point of order. And we gave them all the time in the world, but they were never happy with the way we dealt with it. And I thought we used all the rules, Robert's rules. We gave it time to present, then we went to a vote by the members, and she wasn't happy.
Yes, well, this is where the chair needs to take control of the assembly. And I mean, if somebody raises a point of order, then the chair can either agree with it or disagree. So if you say if you agree, you can say, well, thank you, so and so, and then you will implement that suggestion that the person made. Like if you forgot to approve the agenda, well, thank you, Mary, and have the agenda approved. If you don't agree with the point of order, then you can say, well, thank you, Mary, but that's not how it works according to the rules. And then that should be the end of it. Like that person should not be arguing with the chair, because the chair is the ultimate authority. Now, the authority of the chair can be challenged. You can challenge the chair. And if someone does challenge the chair, then they need a 2/3 vote in agreement with them to overturn that decision by the chair. Otherwise, what the chair says goes.
And you can remove them from the meeting if they continuously are disruptive?
Yeah, the chair can ask the person to leave.
Okay.
Unless you have a burly sergeant at arms, there's no way to force them. And I guess you don't want to physically harm anyone, of course, but I mean, you could, if there was a sergeant at arms, you could ask the sergeant at arms to escort them out, so they would go over.
Well, this was all done via Zoom, so it was pretty easy to do it via Zoom, right?
You can just cut them off. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Any other questions? I see one question here from Cecilia Smith. She put it in the chat. You can put them in the chat too now if you have any questions. Cecilia is asking, does the agenda need to be approved at the beginning of every meeting? If there is an agenda, if it's a formal business meeting where you have minutes and an agenda, yes, the agenda needs to be approved. But if it's like a club business meeting where somebody pops up a motion, well, like there is no agenda per se, so you don't have to worry about that. Anything else?
Simon, I have a question really quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. So my question is around the role of president or presiding officer. Like I've often heard that the president is the only person that can break a tie vote. Can you speak a little bit about the role of the president, just in terms of making motions or doing those sort of things when they're also presiding over the meeting?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of misinformation about that presidents can't vote, or they can only vote to break them or make a tie. A president can vote, anytime they want to, and they can also speak to a motion, and they can even present a motion if they want to. Okay, that's according to the rules. However, it's wise for the president to be impartial if he or she can. So often people will decide not to vote unless it's going to make a difference. So if the president doesn't vote, and if a tie vote comes up, well, then they can cast their vote, and that will decide the question. In some associations have bylaws so that a president gets 2 votes. They can vote once with the group, and if there's a tie, the president can vote again to break the tie. But there's no rules against the president voting whenever the president wishes to.
Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Any more questions? From Anjanette, it was, when making a motion, do you have to use the words "I move"? Yes, you should use the words "I move that." That's the right way to do it. And there's another question. Are these rules for Toastmasters or any organizations with regards to voting? These are the rules for Robert's Rules of Order. So for whatever association adopts Robert's Rules of Order, these will be the rules. And as I said, the other rules of order aren't that much different, especially when it comes to making a motion and seconding a motion. The rules are basically the same. So yes, these are the same for any organization. Now, when it comes to elections, the rules could be different in different organizations. the basic rules of order. As I said, elections aren't really part of the rules of order. They're a different, they're usually associations, bylaws. Well, thank you everyone for participating and for attending. I hope you learned a little bit.